New developments on the media's latest obsession regarding Donald Trump, the alleged racism and sexism behind his cabinet picks. As the president-elect started rolling out his choices, Politico noting, quote, white men dominate Trump's early staff selections, with the Washington Post referring to Trump's, quote, binder full of white men, even as two women were given cabinet positions today. Politico reacted with this headline, suggesting Trump had broken a streak of appointing white men. This phenomenon wasn't relegated to print, as some talking heads lobbed similar complaints this past weekend. Watch.
I see a really old group of old white men. And I say that in a not to be snide, but I think the groups that now in the country are most concerned about what they're seeing coming out of the Trump administration is the vast number of millions and millions of non-white Americans who are looking at that group, not just because it's so white, but also because if you take those people together, Bannon, Flynn, and Sessions, all three of them have a history of being involved in at a minimum, racially insensitive endeavors.
There's a concern about the lack of diversity so far in the hiring. We saw that he brought in Michelle Rhee and Nikki Haley. But is there really any likelihood of a pick who's not a white male at this point?
Wow. Joining me now, townhall.com news editor and Fox contributor Katie Pavlich, Democratic analyst and Fox contributor Julie Roginski, and senior editor at The Federalist, Molly Hemingway. Katie, perhaps they should have waited. Maybe a day or two would have helped, because two women were picked today.
Right, we have 5 picks, what they're criticizing with the white men card, right, out of the 300 that Donald Trump is going to have to select for his administration. We have 2 female picks today, so that's a pretty good average. And the bottom line is that there's no grace from the left whatsoever. They're willing to accuse Republicans, regardless of the number of diverse picks that they have, of sexism and racism. Mitt Romney in 2012 talked about binders full of women, clearly referring to resumes of women he wanted to hire because he wanted more women in his cabinet as governor, and he got destroyed for it. And finally, I would just want to point out that the media, which overwhelmingly supports Democrats, isn't realizing any of the lessons of this election. The DNC is huddling right now, trying to figure out how they can regroup with the white working class of America, and yet here we are again insulting white men who are qualified to help run the country and to bring us a better future.
Julie, to her point, isn't that what matters the most, is that the most qualified people for these positions get the job?
Yeah, I largely agree with Katie. Look, I don't really care what their diversity factor is. I care about their policies, and some of these policies and people who he's appointed, Jeff Sessions comes to mind, certainly Michael Flynn comes to mind, scare me not because they're white men, but because of the policies they espouse.
But that's not what the media is reporting. That's not, hold on, but let's go back to that Politico headline. White men dominate Trump's early staff selections. They would only later tweak that, as we mentioned, to Trump breaks streak of white male appointments. Molly, it just seems like they've been unbelievably quick to judge.
Well, yeah, there needs to be a bit of patience as we learn a little bit more about the cabinet. And at the same time, just the entire prism of talking about it as if the only thing that matters about these picks are their sex or their skin color is silly. Donald Trump wants to pick people who will fulfill his policy goals, and that's what he's looking for. At the same time, I actually have heard from people working the transition that he does have something of a blind spot as to how diversity can be a political asset. And this is probably because he has a background in business, and yet as head of the federal government, that's a public institution, and a sense of ownership is important. And so diversity can be a really good way to achieve some of that.
Last I checked, he had women working at his company and senior level positions at his company, Katie.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of his main arguments, especially when all those allegations from women came out against him. And it is true that Ivanka Trump is probably going to take over his business. She's a woman. One of his top senior advisors is an African-American woman. He's hired many people inside of his company who happen to be women. But again, it goes back to what I think all three of us agree on, amazingly, is that people who are most qualified for the position should be chosen.
Oh, come on, surely we can get Julie to disagree with us here. I mean,
yeah, we shouldn't be judging people on skin color or gender. I thought we were way past that and trying to move into the future.
See, Julie and I are outnumbered all the time, so we know each other's personalities. I bet you, Julie, I can get you going here.
Go for it. Go. Come on. Try me.
So Martha Raddatz's response was, the 5 picks announced so far have all been white men, so the pressure is on. And then you look at some of the headlines that are coming out of the media. on this. And Julie, it just seems like people aren't interested with getting the right person in there for the job. And I know you guys all agree on that. But this is what are we, just over 2 weeks after the election took place?
Look, as I said, this is one of the few times we're actually going to see me not criticize Donald Trump for taking his time. Let's see what he comes out with. Let's see the totality of his cabinet, the totality of his appointments. As I said, what I think Democrats and liberals should be focusing on is not gender or race. It should be their positions and how they comport with the positions of the majority of Americans. And the bottom line is some of these picks are acceptable to me because while I don't agree with them, Nikki Haley I think is an acceptable pick. Some of them are very troubling to me because even though I don't agree with him, I think Jeff Sessions goes too far, not just for me, but for most Americans in his views. He was too racist for a Republican Senate to approve in the 1980s, apparently, for a federal judgeship. But now in 2016, it's okay for him to be the chief law enforcement officer in the country. So that's what's troubling to me. As I said before, his race and his gender have nothing to do with it.
This also seems like the media have not learned any lessons from how much they messed up throughout this entire cycle. They're still obsessed about identity politics. They're still pushing a narrative instead of just reporting facts. And they're completely out of touch with how much they messed up that coverage.
And then, of course, we just spoke with Dr. Ben Carson. There could possibly be an African-American pick thrown into the mix here. It's obviously a very difficult balancing act that he's got. The criticism is likely to continue. But other than that, Molly, last word to you. Can he win?
Well, I think what's interesting is Donald Trump is doing a good job of just communicating directly with people. And so that traditional gatekeeper role that the media held, where they decide what the big story is going to be, they're not having the same power that they used to. And I think Donald Trump has a relationship with the people where he can just communicate that these are the picks that he's chosen to advance his policy goals, and people can decide how they feel about those picks.
All right. Good to have all three of you. Thank you. Enjoy your Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving.
All right. Well, some college cupcakes are taking their opposition to the president-elect even further, suggesting that having police officers from part of a union who endorsed Trump represents a, quote, act of violence against them. And coming up, does Representative Keith Ellison have more to answer for regarding his own controversial past, especially if he is going after the history of other lawmakers? Carl Higbee and Teslin Figaro will be here on that.